Hello, and welcome back to another session of Out of Context. I'm going to do things a little differently tonight because, again, I listen to all of you. I am going to have my drink, but I was actually asked to make my drink on screen and kind of say what I was drinking. It's not very exciting. I drink the same thing every week, but, here it is. So, start with glass with ice in it, because ice is important. And then take the main event, which is Jameson. I actually hate Jameson. However, it's cheap. So put a little bit of it in there. You don't want too much. So we're just going to do that. Put this back down here. And I'm going to keep it over here tonight simply because the book that I'm reading tonight, the chapter I think is twice as long as the others that I've read. So there's a good chance that I'm going to run out. And at some point, well, that should be fun. But anyway, so just to complete the drink, Jameson and ginger ale. A little ginger ale in there. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. That is awful. Ugh. Fantastic. That's exactly what we're looking for. So, out of context, I'm going to read from a book. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, as per usual. So, hope you enjoy. But honestly, I don't think I care. And I'm certainly not going to care after I drink that wretched thing. Hardly anyone knew who John Paul Stapp was when he arrived at Muroc Air Base in the spring of 1947. The U.S. Air Force flight surgeon kept largely to himself, working closely with a skeleton crew of civilians he had brought with him from the Northrop Corporation out of Los Angeles. Stapp quickly gained a reputation for operating something of a black market on the base. With barely any funding or resources to bring their project to fruition, Stapp bartered, trading medical advice and examinations for the parts and equipment his team needed. I might as well do it once in one sentence, right? Or twice. That's awful. However non-traditional Stapp's method, there was nothing nefarious about his actions. His project was sanctioned by the Air Force, albeit at such a cripplingly low level of bureaucracy that he was left painfully underfunded. The silver lining was that his low priority kept him off the radar of the higher levels, the men Stapp envisioned spending their lives safely behind large mahogany desks, men who he knew would penalize his failure but take credit for his success. Operating under their radar made him solely responsible for either outcome, but also afforded him great freedom. Gradually and discreetly, Stapp's team built a sled reminiscent of a soapbox racer though this one was made of spare aluminum pieces bolted together rather than a wooden crate. It had a seat for a pilot and, appropriately for Muroc at the time, but untraditionally for soapbox racers, a bank of rockets strapped to its back. The sled sat at one end of a 2,000-foot-long track. At the other end was a braking system designed to stop the sled instantly, the sudden deceleration subjecting its unlucky occupant to a sudden high load of G-forces. This was the unorthodox contraption's purpose, to simulate what a pilot would experience in a high-speed crash. I'll put that close enough. Textbooks said the limit of human tolerance was 18 Gs, or 18 times the force of gravity. Stapp's research was dedicated to determining whether, as he suspected, man could tolerate far more. The first step in his human deceleration research was this soapbox racer sled nicknamed the G-Whiz. The G-Whiz. The G-Whiz first raced down its track with a 185-pound humanoid dummy in its seat. In December, after 35 test runs, Stapp took the dummy's place. One rocket was fired on the first manned test of his program, sending Stapp tearing down the 2,000-foot-long track at a relatively easy 90 miles per hour. The next day, he was back in the G-Whiz when 3 rockets were fired, more than doubling his speed to 200 miles per hour. Every time the sled came to a halt, Stapp was exposed to a punishing load of negative G-forces when he slammed against the harness, keeping him in place. The heavy bruising he sustained, along with abrasions, broken ribs, concussions, and even lost fillings, didn't deter Stapp. I'll bring this closer so I can reach it faster. The test left him battered but invigorated. Riding the G-Whiz, he survived a maximum load of 35 Gs, 35 times the force of gravity, proving that men can withstand far higher forces of deceleration than anyone had previously thought. News that Stapp was using himself as a test subject eventually made its way to his home laboratory, the Aeromedical Laboratory at Wright Field outside of Dayton, Ohio, though it was hardly a surprise. Stapp had a reputation for using himself as a test subject. He had once flown to 47,000 feet in an unheated, unpressurized cabin just to experience the painful effects of the bends firsthand. It was a line of research that led to Stapp's discovery that a pilot could avoid the bends by breathing pure oxygen for a half hour before takeoff. But the rocket sled runs were too much for his horrified superiors at the Wright Field and, fearing he might kill himself, Stapp was ordered to cease sending humans flying down the track in his sled and use chimpanzees instead. The NACA contingent at Edwards, however, was very interested in Stapp's human research. Being in the business of high-performance aircraft poised to push inexorably toward space, the NACA was interested in the human element of spaceflight, particularly the acceleration and sudden deceleration a pilot would experience when launching on a rocket. Oh, it's going way too fast. This interest prompted Stapp to defy his orders and reclaim his seat in the G-Whiz for the sake of the NACA's research. By June 1951, volunteers had made 74 runs in the G-Whiz, nearly 4 years of operation. The G-Whiz's nearly 4 years of operation, Stapp himself being its most frequent rider. I don't know why anyone would do this. But the sled at Edwards wasn't enough for the flight surgeon who wanted to reach faster speeds for more violent decelerations. Yeah, of course. Stapp's opportunity for a new phase of research came with his transfer to the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, the site adjacent to the White Sands Proving Ground. Stapp arrived in New Mexico in 1953 and, still working with engineers from Northrop, built a far more powerful sled called Sonic Wind No. 1. This sled featured a replica of a jet's pilot seat, a full propulsion section at its back end, and a simple but effective water brake system at the far end of the track. A scoop attached to the underside of the sled would dig into a series of dams between the track's rails. Resistance from the scoop's digging into the water would stop the sled almost instantaneously for the hard deceleration Stapp wanted. As was his way, Stapp used himself as the first human subject for the Sonic Wind speed run. In March 1954, just 6 of the 9 rear-mounted rockets ignited to propel... 9? I didn't remember that. Ignited to propel the sled to the brief top speed of 421 miles per hour. It was a land speed record, and when the sled stopped, Stapp was subjected to 22 Gs. Unsatisfied, Stapp added more rockets and more aims to the program. Because the sled had no windshield, the faster runs were also a way to gather data on human tolerance to wind blasts, something else pilots would experience in high-speed ejections. And he remained the test subject. On December 10th, almost 7 years after his first rocket sled run in the G-Whiz, Stapp was strapped into the seat of the Sonic Wind No. 1 as it sat at the end of its track at Holloman. His arms and legs were secured to stop them from flailing. He wore a helmet which was strapped to his headrest to protect him from whiplash. He had a bite guard in his mouth to protect his teeth. He also had a crew spread around the desert. Technicians running the test were on hand, and photographers were ready to capture image data of the test, specifically the final deceleration. In the sky, an Air Force pilot Joe Kittinger was waiting in a T-33 jet, prepared to fly over the end of the track at the moment of deceleration so the photographer seated behind him could capture the test from above. The timing for everything was crucial, as were clear skies for the sake of images. Behind the sled's seat that morning was a cluster of 9 solid-fuel rockets that together produced 40,000 pounds of thrust. Stapp was only going to subject himself to this high-speed run once. Everything had to be perfect. Once the morning clouds broke, the countdown for the test started. With a thunderous roar, the 9 rockets came to life, and in 5 seconds, sonic wind reached its top speed of 632 miles per hour. Stapp was thrown back against his seat with a burst of speed, briefly losing consciousness. Overhead, Kittinger watched as the sled flew across the desert floor faster than his T-33 jet. Then the scoops dug into the water trenches, sapping the sled's energy and stopping it cold in just 1.4 seconds. The sudden deceleration subjected Stapp to 46.2 Gs. He momentarily felt his body weight 6,800 pounds as he slammed forward against his restraints with the same force as if he had smashed into a brick wall while driving his car at 120 miles per hour. And then the sled was still. Immobilized by his restraints, Stapp felt unbearable pain. He was struggling to breathe. As emergency personnel removed him from the sonic wind seat, he mumbled that he couldn't see, that he had somehow gone blind. Stapp was rushed to the hospital for a thorough medical examination, but amazingly the doctors found that he had sustained no critical injuries. He had cracked ribs, 2 broken wrists, burst blood vessels in his eyes, and minor damage to his circulatory and respiratory systems, but he was otherwise fine. After an hour in the hospital, Stapp had regained his eyesight and was eating a hearty lunch. Stapp wanted to push his rocket sleds further before he had fully recovered. Before he had fully recovered, he was already planning to add more rockets to Sonic Wind number 1, with the goal of reaching 1,000 miles per hour, fast enough to break the speed of sound. But the Air Force stepped in and grounded him from any more rocket sled runs for his own safety. Though banned from further rocket sled tests, Stapp had other outlets for his curiosity. Wright Field was home to the Material Division of the U.S. Army Air Corps, the branch responsible for developing advanced aircraft equipment and accessories. This branch's activities made the Ohio site's name synonymous with developments in aeronautical engineering and innovative research. Not long after Stapp arrived in 1946, he had witnessed one such test on a warm day in June. 3 men sat on the grass wrestling a crash test dummy outfitted in a standard flight suit and cap into a simple seat. Once they had strapped it in tight, the dummy and seat were hoisted by a crane and lowered into the uncovered cockpit of an aircraft parked nearby. Six technicians ensured everything was in the right place before tying a rope to the back of the seat. The end of the rope was in the hand of another man who also sat crouching in the grass. God damn it. The crowd of onlookers moved a safe distance from the aircraft, which in this case was just feet away. Then the man in the grass pulled the rope. In an instant, the seat carrying the dummy shot up and backward, tracing a high arc over the aircraft's tail. Both landed separately, the dummy in a net, and the seat nearby on the ground. The landing was irrelevant. It was the explosive ejection that mattered, a novel concept pioneered by the Luftwaffe during the Second World War that was fast becoming a fundamental part of American aviation. The test underscored something interesting for Stapp. The state-of-the-art aviation was advancing as rockets propelled aircraft higher and faster, but human pilots weren't getting any more robust. The disparity between increasingly powerful aircraft and human frailty became a research niche for Stapp. Deceleration tests were a part of the subsequent investigation, but tests of human tolerance to extreme environments was another pathway. Higher flights meant men would soon be visiting the upper reaches of the atmosphere, a poorly understood region, particularly where human factors were concerned. These men would be dealing with radiation from space, exposure to a near vacuum, and undoubtedly psychological challenges. I lost my part. I lost my place. Oh, yeah, okay. Aircraft, Stapp knew, wouldn't be a suitable means to investigate the human factors of spaceflight. For all their technological complexity and sophistication, the rocket plane streaking through the skies over Edwards Air Force Base gave the pilots only brief exposure to upper atmospheric conditions before falling back toward the dry lake bed. This is going well. Even the X-15's highest altitude flights would only expose the pilot to space radiation for a few minutes. The pilot would need a specialized flight suit, but he could essentially ignore issues of radiation. Balloons would put the pilot in the exact opposite situation, rising to altitude slowly as the lifting gas in the cavernous envelope expanded. A balloon could theoretically stay at altitude for an extended period, exposing the pilot to space radiation long enough to gather data. Stapp earmarked balloons as the ideal testbed for this line of research. He imagined a balloon large enough to carry a pressurized, high-altitude capsule beneath it that could serve as a floating laboratory. When Stapp arrived at Holloman in 1953, he established and assumed responsibility for the Aeromedical Field Laboratory, a major goal of which was to understand the hazards of humans in the upper atmosphere. Jesus Christ, I'm not going to make it through this. I'm just gonna keep fucking up more and more. Foremost were questions of cosmic rays coming from deep space and radiation exposure, and specifically cosmic ray bombardment of living tissue. David Simons saw the same shortcoming in small, suborbital sounding rockets that Stapp saw in rocket aircraft flights. Not only did Simons want a longer exposure to the upper altitude, he needed a more reliable way to recover the biological specimens. The Alberts monkeys stood as a prime example. The first primates in space launched under Simons' guidance had fared horribly in the nose cones of their V-2 Blossom rockets. In seeking a means to study the effects of high-altitude flight on living beings, Simons also saw balloons as the best option. Balloon flights had changed dramatically in the nearly 2 centuries since Joseph Michel and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier, yeah, sure, that sounds right, launched a sheep, a duck, and a rooster in the open basket of a hot air balloon over southern France in 1783. And it was due in large part to Otto Vinson. After spending a large portion of the Second World War in an internment camp, the German-born aeronautical engineer was hired as the chief engineer at the Minnesota Tool and Manufacturing Corporation. It was here that Vinson was introduced to the world of ballooning. In late 1945, he was recruited by Swiss balloonist Jean Piccard. What? Oh. It's not spelled right, though. I digress. He was recruited by Swiss balloonist Jean Piccard to work on Project Helios, a joint program by the U.S. Navy, the National Science Foundation, and General Mills that would see a man launched up into the stratosphere. General Mills makes cereal, don't they? Maybe we should be more concerned about them than I think. Vinson was ultimately recruited by General Mills to work on balloon development and establish the company's aeronautical laboratories, a branch whose usefulness persisted after Helios was canceled. At General Mills, Vinson helped advance the science of ballooning. Whatever. What are you saying yes to? I don't even know. At General Mills, Vincent helped advance the science of ballooning. He developed a way of heat-sealing plastic gores together and developed a load-bearing tape to seal these joints such that the weight of a balloon's payload was evenly distributed over its entire surface, so the material was less likely to tear. Yeah, exactly. Advancing Cinnamon Toast Crunch. It's weird, right? I don't think we should be putting cereal up in space, but they do. I want to talk to somebody about that. Wouldn't tear. He also developed a polyethylene balloon that soon took the place of rubberized ones. Though typically just 1 or 2 thousandths of an inch thick, the exceptionally strong plastic was resistant to expansion once the balloon was fully inflated, decreasing the likelihood of it bursting at altitude. Vincent's polyethylene balloons were also able to take advantage of a gas's expansion. A small amount of a lighter-than-air lifting gas could be pumped into the balloon on the ground. As it rose, the sun's heat combined with the lower atmosphere. As it rose, the sun's heat combined with the lower atmospheric pressure would cause the gas to expand to fill the balloon's full volume. Vincent launched the first balloon of his own design in September of 1947. The next year, he left General Mills to start his own balloon manufacturing company. God damn it. Vincent Research Inc., based in Minneapolis. The startup money came from his in-laws, his wife, Vera Hebrecht. Oh, no, fuck this whole thing up. Let's try it again. The startup money came from his in-laws. His wife, Vera Hebrecht, was the wealthy daughter of a society photographer from Detroit. It was Vincent Research that pioneered the use of polyethylene resin for plastic balloons that were opening doors for high-altitude research at Holloman. The first polyethylene balloon had been launched at Holloman on July 3, 1947, 20 days before the first missiles took to the skies over the military base. The years that followed saw balloons carry cosmic ray track plates to altitude to measure radiation. There were also flights using mice to determine the effects of cosmic radiation on living beings. The mice flights presented an interesting challenge for Simons, namely how to keep his animals alive in a pressurized capsule for longer flights than the Alberts on V2 Blossoms. Using the mouse as a yardstick, he developed a system wherein one mouse unit was the amount of heat produced by a mouse. From there, he could scale up his capsule designs for other payloads, for a menagerie of small animals rather than a large number of mice. One day, Stapp walked into Simon's office wondering how many mouse units a man produced, and whether it would be possible to launch a human in a scale-up version of his animal capsules. Simons thought over the question and did some basic calculations. The idea didn't immediately raise red flags for Simons. A 500 mouse unit capsule, that's so ridiculous. Mouse unit. A 500 mouse unit capsule should be able to carry a man into the upper atmosphere, he told Stapp, and keep him aloft long enough to gather data about the environment. I'm actually going to run out of drink. I don't know how much longer this chapter is. Oh my god. There's no way. Oh, okay. 500 mouse unit capsule. Alright, here we go. Both men agreed that a human flight would not only be useful for biomedical research, but necessary. Animal passengers couldn't do anything but breathe, and, if the mood struck them, also eat, urinate, and defecate during a high-altitude flight. Those are important things, though. Only a human could describe the experience, run tests, and serve as a subject for research into the psychological aspects of high-altitude flight and shed light on the thoughts and feelings future space travelers might have to leaving Earth. It was an invaluable data set Stapp and Simons knew they couldn't get any other way. Besides, there was an increasing need not only to understand the upper atmospheric environment, but to develop the capsules and self-contained pressurized environments that pilots would need in high-altitude aircraft and space travelers would need outside the atmosphere. For the moment, a manned balloon flight was the best way to simulate the space environment in a controlled and sustained manner. Love mass units in men. Let's see what you did there. Heartened by Simon's like-minded thoughts, Stapp upped the ante. He didn't just want to launch a man, he wanted to keep him at altitude. He asked Simons whether it would be possible for one of these capsules to get a man to an altitude of 100,000 feet and keep him there for at least 24 hours. Simons said yes. Then Stapp asked if Simons would be willing to make the flight himself. For a scientist accustomed to being overshadowed by the fighter jocks who got the glory assignments, this was a rare chance for Simons to carry out his experiments in the actual test environment. He wouldn't have to rely on someone else's description of the environment, matching their retellings to the data to create a complete picture of the test. He would be the scientist and the subject all in one, reaping benefits from both sides. Yes, Simons told Stapp. He wanted to go up in the balloon. The new project underway, Stapp appointed Simons director of the space biology program. Completing the trifecta that would send a man into the stratosphere, Stapp and Simons sought out Otto Vinzen, hoping to bring his expert knowledge of balloons to bear on their program. By the summer of 1955, the balloon engineer was partnered with 2 Air Force doctors. The trio reasoned that a 24-hour manned flight to 115,000 feet was feasible and would give them the data they were after. The Air Force also came on board, though with some reservations. The chief of the Human Factors Division at the Air Research and Command Headquarters provisionally signed off on the project in August of that year, providing the program didn't overlap with other balloon projects. One competing program was called Strata Lab, a Navy program funded by the Office of Naval Research and the National Science Foundation. It was an offshoot of the unrealized Helios program Vinzen had briefly worked on to fly a laboratory above 96% of the atmosphere. The ultimate goal was to measure the near-space environment with almost no distortion from the atmosphere. I lost my place again, sorry. The ultimate goal was to measure the near-space environment with almost no distortion from the atmosphere. The Air Force's own competing program was one investigating the biophysics of escape, specifically the psychological and Specifically the physiological and psychological aspects of ejecting from an aircraft. This went hand in hand with Stapp's deceleration studies. Stapp and Simons' project gradually solidified. They named it Project Daedalus. Daedalus? I actually don't know how to say that word. It's Greek. I'm just going to drink a little bit. Daedalus, and we're going to go with Daedalus. Daedalus in Greek mythology was a craftsman and artisan who created wings of feathers and wax for his son Icarus. Oh yeah, Icarus. Whose hubris led him to fly too close to the sun. Yeah, all right. But when it turned out that Daedalus was the name of a classified atomic-powered aircraft project, they renamed their ballooning project Man High, which was eventually streamlined to Man High. As planning moved forward, the project... God damn it. Okay. As planning moved forward, the program on the whole was hampered by meager funding and continued wavering interest from the Air Force. Though Stapp stood firmly behind the project at the local level at Holloman, he still needed to forward the proposal to Air Force headquarters for approval. Headquarters, unable to justify a manned balloon program simply under the heading of cosmic ray research, was not keen on the program. At the same time, there wasn't enough reason to stop the program from moving forward either. And so Man-Hi pressed on from under Simon's rule as project officer operating on STAP's all-too-familiar shoestring budget. Measuring the effects of cosmic rays on human passengers was the principal line of inquiry. Designing the capsule that could keep them alive through the flight was the program's second major research goal. As Man-Hi developed, the capsule proved to be the mission's biggest challenge. Scientists, Simon's among them, had been launching balloons with animal passengers for years. But the human passenger demanded a far more complex system, as did the full day length of the mission. You don't get to find out what I'm reading until the end, because for some reason I find that amusing. The Man-Hi capsule emerged as the most complex manned system designed to date, by necessity larger and far more precise than any animal system. The Air Force eventually signed a contract with Vinson Research in November 1955, and as the prime contractor, Vinson was responsible for building both the capsule and the balloon, and was also responsible for managing the development, fabrication, maintenance, and modification of the Man-Hi capsule throughout the program's lifetime. What a fucking sentence. This is going well. The contract stipulated that the balloon be ready to fly at the end of January 1956. The first flight was tentatively set for March. Project Man-Hi's ambitious timeline proved to be incompatible with its modest budget. Like Stapp had done at Edwards, he and Simons were forced to take whatever bits and pieces they could to bring to life the mission, and specifically the capsule. I'm out of a drink, however, I have a solution. And I'm going to hate this solution. I'm not looking forward to this. I gotta somehow pull it together, because I don't want to go through this. Project Man-Hi's ambitious timeline proved incompatible with its modest budget. Like Stapp had done at Edwards, I already read this. If you can figure it out, I'll tell you what, if you can figure it out, I will give you $10. But you can't look it up using any of the text. You have to tell me how you figured it out, and I have to believe it, which is going to be hard, because I'm not going to believe it. I might, though. We'll see how persuasive you are. Where the hell did I leave off? Specifically the castle. This piecemeal approach set them behind schedule. March came and went with no capsule and no balloon to show for the Man-Hi program. Still, the program was taking steps forward. Well, you can't Google it. That's cheating. I'm not going to give you $10 for Googling it. I can Google it. Well, actually, I can just look at the thing. But that's not the point. You got to stop. I'm trying to focus here, okay? Still, the program was taking steps forward. Shut up, Jordan. March brought formal approval from the Air Force Command, though the endorsement demoted cosmic ray research to a secondary project goal behind development of a life support capsule system. As time wore on, the price tag on Man-Hi rose steadily from the original projected cost of $29,950 to nearly $240,000 over the course of a year. You can't even buy a house for that anymore. The addition of launch support and flight tracking crews was partially responsible for the increase, but mechanical improvements to the capsule had raised the price far more. When cost overruns became more than the Air Force was willing to contribute, Vinson himself stepped in and assumed financial responsibility. Such was his and his company's dedication to seeing the project through. This is tough. Finally, in the spring of 1957, the Man-Hi capsule emerged from its period of high-cost development. Made of an aluminum alloy, the hermetically sealed capsule was an 8-foot 3-inch tall cylinder with rounded ends, held upright by tubular struts that doubled as a shock absorption system. Fuck. Oh, that's so awful. God, that's terrible. Close to the top was a band with 6 portholes. Each faced a different direction, and some had angled some had angled adjacent mirrors so the occupant could have full view of the environment around him. Why does Jameson taste so terrible? Who likes this? Oh my god. The capsule itself was pressurized to an equivalent of 26,000 feet with a chemically treated atmosphere that removed carbon dioxide and excess moisture. The capsule pioneered a multi-gas system. A combination of oxygen, helium, and nitrogen would provide a breathable atmosphere for the pilot and also decrease the risk of a fatal oxygen fire. The cabin was, after all, crammed with electrical systems that could short out and spark at any moment. And though life support was the program's principal goal, the possibility for disaster remained. As such, a personal oxygen system was included in the capsule should the cabin pressure fail or should Simons need to bail out from altitude, though jumping out and landing by personal parachute wasn't something he hoped he would have to do. Gathering the best scientific data meant a controlled flight from start to finish. If he had to bail out, he would lose the capsule and possibly the valuable data. God damn it. You were wrong, FGSFDS000. Well, that's an interesting, I'm going to have to actually look into that. God, this is terrible. Why do people drink this? Oh my god. Alright, I'm good. For constant communications, the capsule was fitted with a high-frequency receiver so Simons could talk to the ground controllers. Shut up, Jordan. Nobody likes you. There was a telemetry... There was a telemetry system as a backup he could use to send messages in Morse code. This system used a series of batteries attached beneath the capsule, each fitted with a small parachute so they could be jettisoned as ballast. There was also a tape recorder on board so Simons could record his thoughts and impressions in real time, preserving his own visual, emotional, and psychological impressions as they happened. His vital signs, such as respiration and heart rate, would be monitored by onboard systems throughout the flight as well. The sheer number of electrical systems meant the man-high capsule didn't need a heating system. With all the instrumentation up and running, the capsule would be a hot, crowded space. It's the same sentence. I don't have to do this twice. With all the instrumentation up and running, the capsule would be a hot, crowded space in which to spend a day. Oh, Jesus Christ. It actually needed a cooling system. The solution was an open container of water. Because water boils at lower temperature... Fuck me. At lower temperature, a higher altitude... This is gonna be a fucking train wreck. Because water boils at a lower temperature at higher altitudes, an open container would draw heat from the capsule during the flight. An open container? Well, I have an open container. I highly doubt that they were... God, it's so terrible. I highly doubt that they were doing scientific experiments for space with Jameson as the open container. The completed man-high capsule was put through a series of unmanned tests to check out all its systems. Animal flights approximating the weight and oxygen use of a man tested the capsule's atmospheric system. A crash test dummy was dropped from altitude to test the personal parachute Simons would use in an emergency. Coming on the heels of these checkout tests, the first flight was shaping up to be a shakedown mission. One that would work out the remaining kinks before the real science missions could begin. Simons was ready, but Stapp had other ideas. This is terrible. I'm just drinking straight whiskey now, like some kind of animal. How much do I have left? I don't want to know, but I need to know. Okay, we're making it. So how did you find that? FGS, FDS. Because you might be right, but you might be wrong. I swear to God, if you looked up the Google stuff. The Google stuff? What the hell is the Google stuff? If you looked up the Google stuff. Show me a picture. I want to see a picture of this on your bookshelf. Pics or it didn't happen. Where the hell was I? Stapp had done enough experimental tests during his tenure with the Air Force to know that first flights were notoriously plagued by technical issues. Yeah, no shit. He didn't want Simons flying a checkout flight. He wanted this first flight to go to a test pilot, someone accustomed to testing new vehicles in strange environments who could react quickly in an emergency without losing his cool and sacrificing data collection. Someone, in short, who had a chance of surviving if everything went wrong. He solicited volunteers from the Corps of Test Pilots at Holloman and found a very willing Joe Kittinger. Yeah, that's the guy from before. Stapp had first met Kittinger before he was flying a T-33 over the Sonic Wind No. 1 track in the New Mexico desert. See, that's cheating. I can't give you $10 now. I can't do it. I'm disappointed in you. Also, I'm disappointed that I have no way to actually pronounce your name. Like, there's no reasonable way to just be like 55 0. There's no way to do it. It's too bad. I wish I could pronounce your name, but I have to like spell it out. Sorry, I was reading everybody. I apologize. Kittinger had volunteered for a mystery assignment that turned out to be one of Stapp's zero-gravity projects. Cursory research told the pilot that the flight surgeon was something of a mad genius who not so quietly believed humans could survive a trip into space. Once assigned to Stapp's project, Kittinger learned his task was to fly a jet in parabolic arcs, climbing at a steep angle, then diving back down to give a medical officer in the rear seat brief spurts of weightlessness at the top of each arc. For Kittinger, the very precise flight profile was a fun challenge, something different that required a skill he didn't normally use when testing an aircraft. For Stapp, Kittinger's ability to fly a nearly perfect parabola on his first attempt was impressive. The first time Kittinger flew a biomedical flight, Simons had been his passenger. The pair went up, and before long Kittinger became so engrossed in the challenging flight profile, and Simons so enthralled with the novel sensation, that they stayed up long enough to dip into their reserve fuel. Simons remained unfazed as Kittinger called down that he was going to make an emergency landing, completely confident in his pilot's skill as he watched fire trucks and emergency personnel racing to take their positions along the runway. I think I fucked that one up. You know, it's starting to taste pretty good. It's probably not a good sign. Only when Kittinger lost an engine and found that his landing gear light refused to illuminate did Simon start to become concerned. He knew Kittinger was an ace pilot, but also knew that one engine and no landing gear was not a great situation. Duh. It turned out that the landing gear was down after all, and Kittinger managed a textbook landing with one engine. A stroke of good luck, he said. Going through an alarming amount of this. Oh, no, it's awful again. It's awful again. Alright, I'm good. Between these... Alright, that's a typo. That's not on me. It says between theses. Theses. I don't know what thesis is. That's not my fault. I'm not drinking for it. Between these parabolic flights and his participation in the Sonic Wind program, volunteering had paid off for Kittinger. While he remained a pilot with the fighter test section at Holloman, he found himself on loan to the Aeromedical Laboratory fairly frequently, his third time as the alternate pilot for Project Manhigh. Manhigh was something completely foreign to Kittinger. The capsule designed to simply hang below the balloon was a far cry from the precision flight paths he'd grown used to flying. But he had also noticed that on all of the parabolic flights he'd flown, that he had never once been sick. It was something scientists at the Aeromedical Lab had noticed as well. They were convinced pilots would be the nation's first spacemen, and now Kittinger was a pioneer in that field. I'm good. Under Manhigh, Kittinger and Simons went through the same pre-flight preparations. Well, Cassie is here. Cassie, I'm just going to tell you now. You're kind of a dick. You're my best friend. But you're also kind of a dick. Okay. Under Manhigh, Kittinger and Simons went through the same pre-flight... This is never gonna... This is fucking awful. Under Manhigh, Kittinger and Simons went through the same pre-flight preparations. Stapp outlined 4 basic tests each man would have to pass to qualify for a Manhigh flight. The first was a claustrophobia test. I've never passed that. Oh, it's terrible. Whew. Not only did the Manhigh capsule barely afford its occupant any space to move around, the partial pressure suit severely restricted a pilot's movements. It was designed to constrict his body, and it was also deliberately too short to the torso, fuck me, to take into account the suit's expansion at altitude. This meant the pilot would be kept in an awkward, hunched-over position during all pre-launch activities and the beginning of his ascent before the suit loosened up. He cheated. He cheated, Lady Moffat. He just looked up a sentence. Or she cheated. I shouldn't assume. It's 2018. I apologize. I'm not this much of a dick normally. It is 2018. You need to guess, not Google. Google is... It feels like cheating. Where was I? This meant the pilot would be kept in an awkward hunched-over position during all pre-launch activities and the beginning of his ascent before the suit loosened up. Claustrophobia was the greatest potential psychological challenge, and so both Kittinger and Simons went through a 24-hour test in a confined space. Oh, that's terrible to think about. I'm a little claustrophobic. I don't know that I'd pass. I might be able to fake it, but maybe not. I don't know. The second test was a decompression test in a chamber simulating 100,000 feet, the capsule's planned peak altitude. Both pilots had to be physically and psychologically ready to react to a sudden loss of pressure. And because a loss of pressure might mean bailing out at altitude, both men also had to qualify as parachute jumpers. I can fake my way out of anything. Just shh. I'm trying to read. Cassie. God. This is your fault. Oh no, I have to do this thing. Oh, this is terrible. Yeah, see? FGS, FDS knows what's up. I just got whiskey all over my hand. Kittinger did his training at the Naval Air Station in El Centro, California, where a small group of Air Force and Navy pilots tested new parachute designs. His first jump was so exhilarating that Kittinger, god damn it, he's going to be like every sentence now. This sucks. That Kittinger stuck around and made 9 more jumps that day, earning his Navy parachute wings. This is awful. You know what? Kittinger is not a hard name. I've been drinking for a couple hours now. I'm an idiot. I'm having ginger ale. Shut up. Oh, it's so refreshing. And it's so much not awful. So young adult fiction. What is adunked fiction? I'll tell you what, you give me a book suggestion from that area, and I will read it and try not to hit my microphone like I am right now. Earning his Navy parachute wings. Okay. The final criterion Stapp had laid out was the most necessary one, that Simons and Kittinger both learn to pilot balloons and obtain their free balloon pilot's license. For the Civil Aeronautics Administration, this meant 6 instructional flights lasting 2 hours, 1 controlled flight to 10,000 feet, and 1 hour-long solo flight. Hatchet? Hatchet is a 12 to 14-year-old thing? Hatchet was the shit. I would choose Hatchet. Although the Hardy Boys is pretty good. I don't know Red Fern Grows. And Cassie has already made enough suggestions. She doesn't need to ruin my life any further. Jordan, nobody cares. Nobody cares what you think. I'm sorry, Jordan. I love you. 1 hour long solo flight. Guys, can you just shut up? Hold on a second, all right? I'm trying to read. I only have like 2 pages left. Okay, I have like 4 pages left. I'm not going to make it through this. Holy shit. All right. Simons and Kittinger practiced in the... I'm not drinking anymore. I'm going to be mean to Jordan often. This book is awesome. Just... Shh. We're going to bring this in. Okay, we're focused. Simons and Kittinger practiced the 2-man Skycar training vehicle over farmlands in Minnesota. The duo learned how to manage ballast, dropping weight to lighten the capsule and ascend. And I think my roommate is here. Yeah, Hatchet was great. Oh, hey, Isaac, what's up? Yeah, he just turned and walked away. But listen, I'm going to read Hatchet. Because I fucking love Hatchet. I remember reading Hatchet. And there were multiple Hatchet books. Yeah. No, he just kind of like walked in, looked at me, and rolled his eyes and walked away. So... I feel that was appropriate. Isaac, come say hi. Isaac, I know you're there. He says he's not here. Let's see, where were we? They had a part 2 of Hatchet? Oh, I'm going to have to read that one. I might have to read that one first. Well, no, because it's been so long since I read the first Hatchet. I might have to do that one first. Yo, I'm sorry. Let me finish the book. Or the chapter. It's not the book. The duo learned how to manage ballast, dropping weight to lighten the capsule and ascend. They learned how to vent helium, losing buoyancy to gently lower toward the ground. It was a very different experience than flying a jet for Kittinger, and a very different learning curve. But the quiet stillness was peaceful, and both men eventually learned the intricacies of balloon flight. Rolls off the tongue. Well, I can tell you this much, Jordan. If it made you that upset, you can be damn sure I'm going to read it. I'm going to read Hatchet just for you now. Because fuck you, Jordan. How dare you? You come into my house with that face. I do not want to drink any more whiskey, but I'm going to have to start. That was the agreement. Throughout the training process, Kittinger asked thousands of questions and made almost as many suggestions. He was extremely invested in the program. He was, after all, putting his life in the hands of the Vincent engineers. He wanted to make sure they knew him as an individual, not just a name on a report. Mr. Behavior. I don't know what that means, Paula, but I assume you just disapprove of my behavior. I've had a lot of whiskey, okay? I'm not using that to excuse it. I'm just saying that's what's happening right now. Here we go. Simons, meanwhile, grew suspicious of Kittinger's motivations for getting involved with Man High in the first place. Still dedicated to Man High's scientific aims, Simons wondered if Kittinger, a newly avid parachutist, didn't just want to bail out and parachute down from Man High's peak altitude, even if the move meant compromising the success of the flight. His distrust of Kittinger growing, Simons finally confronted Stapp about Man High's inaugural flight, arguing that he ought to be the pilot. But Stapp remained firm in his conviction that the first pilot go to Kittinger, the test pilot. That he would still be making the first research flight only partially mollified Simons. Kittinger, for his part, approached his Man-High flight more like a scientist than a fighter jock. Working with Stapp had instilled in him a fascination with the science and testing aspects of research flights, and as the flight neared, he devoted an increased amount of time to the Man-High capsule. He was determined to ensure everything stayed on schedule. With the launch just weeks away, Kittinger learned that the Teamsters Union at the Winston plant was planning to go on strike. It was possible that the plastic used to make the balloon might not be delivered on time due to the labor stoppage, ultimately delaying fabrication of the balloon and setting the program behind schedule. 10th circle of hell. I didn't know there were 10 circles of hell. All I know is, yeah, what she said. It was possible that the plastic used to make the balloon might not be delivered on time due to the labor stoppage, ultimately delaying fabrication of the balloon and setting the program behind schedule. Unwilling to wait and see whether this worst-case scenario came to pass, Kittinger took matters into his own hands. Risking personal embarrassment and trouble for the Air Force, he hopped onto an old C-47 military transport plane and flew up to Terre Haute, Indiana, where the plastic for the balloon was made. With a small cohort of conspirators, they loaded crates of balloon material into the plane and flew it covertly into Minneapolis under cover of night. From the airport, the crates were loaded onto a truck and delivered to the Vincent plant mere hours before the strike was scheduled to start. With the material at the Vinson plant, the balloon came together under the watchful eye of Vera Vinson herself. She oversaw construction of a massive system of tables where the 60 long gores of plastic were heat welded together before the seams were sealed with bands that would distribute the weight of the capsule evenly around the balloon. Her team of women inspected every inch of the balloon, looking for pinholes or tiny tears, anything that would compromise its structural integrity once inflated at altitude. The women worked in stocking feet and submitted to daily fingernail inspections to ensure they didn't tear the delicate plastic, a rigorous example of quality control Kittinger appreciated, as he was trusting his life to the strength of this whisper-thin plastic. What do you mean you're not sure why I'm dressed up? I'm reading to you. I should be dressed up. That is the appropriate thing to do. Also, everything else you said is accurate. About an hour before midnight on June 1st, 1957, Kittinger had passed his final medical exam and was wriggling into his partial pressure suit at the Vinson Research Plant in Minneapolis. I do have a pipe, but I can't read with the pipe. I sound ridiculous. The capsule was also going through its final checks. Its liquid oxygen system filled, chemicals added to the air regeneration unit. Fuck me. And the electrical and communication systems given a final check. An hour and a half later, Kittinger was sealed inside the Manhigh capsule, which took on the moniker of Manhigh 1 for this first flight. He left his faceplate open, taking advantage of the capsule's pressurized environment as nitrogen was bled from the cabin and replaced by helium, a gas. That's not exactly true. A gas that would reduce the possibility of Kittinger succumbing to the bends in the event of a sudden decompression, a potentially lethal sickness caused by nitrogen bubbling out of the blood. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mix these up, because I actually do want to make it through this chapter. So I'll just alternate. We're almost there. We're close. Kittinger half sat and half crouched in the capsule for hours as technicians ran a second series of checks before loading him onto a truck and driving the 20 miles to the launch site at Fleming Field near South St. Paul. Still in the pre-dawn hours, Kittinger watched through the small porthole windows as technicians buzzed around the capsule making the final preparations, backlit by the lights illuminating his capsule. As the sun began creeping up above the horizon, an early morning fog swirled around the launch platform, imbuing the scene with an eerie, surreal feeling. The whole team was there, Simons and Stapp included. After working for years with a shoestring budget, the men and women who had devoted their time and, in the Vinson's case, their own money, were finally seeing the results of their hard work. As daylight seeped into the field, a gentle wind picked up, knocking the balloon around as it was filled with helium. Straining against the rollers holding it in place, the balloon was finally released at 6:23, carrying Kittinger off the launch platform. He wasn't alone in the sky. Circling the area were photographic and tracking aircraft. Did I fuck that up? Oh. I think it's this one. Oh, that's bad. But inside the capsule, Kittinger was isolated. Exacerbating his solitude was a communications glitch with the very high-frequency radio. Very high frequency? I mean, that's what is written. I didn't mess it up. I'm just confused. He could hear his ground crew, but they couldn't hear him, forcing him to use the backup continuous wave transmission system. Tapping out messages in Morse code, an employee at the Vinson plant would receive the messages, then call the ground crews in South St. Paul to verbally relay the message. This roundabout method meant a delay in transferring critical information, but it wasn't a showstopper for Kittinger. He tapped out a simple message in Morse code. No sweat. It was a trademark phrase of his that told ground crews he was fine. The higher he rose, the more the helium gas expanded and began to fill the balloon's 2 million cubic feet in earnest, drawing Kittinger inexorably further from the Earth. Less than an hour into the flight, Kittinger glanced down at his oxygen supply gauge and saw that he had used up almost half of his breathable gas in less than an hour, far more than was expected at that stage in the message. Mission. That's the second time I've replaced mission with message. Apparently I don't like the word mission. Logic said to abort the mission then and there, but Kittinger's test pilot instincts took over. Not only did he want to complete the test for his own sake, he also wanted to justify the hard work of the entire team. Besides, he, rather than Simmons, was in that capsule that morning to test the system, and test the system he would. Reasoning that he could probably make it to his peak altitude and back if he carefully rationed his oxygen usage, Kittinger began bleeding oxygen from his suit into the capsule's environment. It's fine, I got it. Ugh. Taking away his own personal backup survival system put his life even more firmly in the hands of Vincent and the Air Force personnel who had built the capsule. Man-High 1 rose steadily through the atmosphere, past the tropopause, toward the stratosphere. Stratosphere? Whatever. I'll drink, it's fine. At 45,000 feet, Kittinger experienced the full force of a jet stream. The capsule was knocked nearly over on its side. Shut up, Jordan. How dare you? And looking out the portholes, he saw the balloon was completely distorted into a concave, bulging mass of plastic. God. I got like one page left. I can do this. I can do this. It's so bad. Why do people drink Jameson? It's awful. Putting the sight out of his mind and his faith in Vera Vincent's army of women, he waited for the balloon to carry him above the fierce winds. As quickly as it had come, the force of the jet stream abated, and the balloon resumed its rounded form. Mrs. Vincent did indeed make excellent balloons. Jesus. At least I'm alternating now. So to be clear, I started with Jameson and ginger ale, but I ran out. I mean, it's gone. So this is just my backup plan. I'm making Jameson and ginger in my stomach. I don't think it's not exactly the same. Kittinger continued to ascend, and as he passed 70,000 feet, the world outside his portholes began to change. Looking down, he could still see the familiar pale blue of the earthly sky as a thick band on the horizon. But as he moved his eyes upward, the blue quickly gave way to inky black. The sun shone bright and strong in the morning sky, but the sky around it remained completely devoid of color. Kittinger was filled with a sense of awe and privilege looking out his small windows. On the ground, Simons became increasingly anxious as the mission wore on. He was still convinced that Kittinger's fondness for parachute jumping would win, and the pilot would find some excuse to bail out, choosing a thrill over science and sacrificing the capsule in the process. Impatient to get Kittinger and the Man-High capsule down safely, Simons radioed the order to begin his descent just before 9 o'clock in the morning. When he got the call, Kittinger knew he had enough oxygen to stay up a little longer, and he wasn't keen to end the mission just yet. Now at 96,000 feet, he had a view of the Earth that few people had ever seen, its curvature clear against a dark sky. And unlike the rocket plane pilots flying high in the skies over Edwards Air Force Base, he had the luxury of sitting and letting the view wash over him in the silence afforded by his balloon's lack of propulsion system. The sky took on a hue he had never seen from the Earth. It occurred to him in that moment that he was the first man to spend any length of time in the near space environment, that he was, in a way, the first man in space. I actually don't remember which one I'm supposed to drink, so I'm just going to do this one. Kittinger didn't have much time to savor the moment. He was already venting the gas from his balloon to begin his slow descent to Earth. But first he toyed with Simons just a little, playing off the doctor's obsession with Kittinger's fondness for parachute jumping. He thought a moment before tapping out his reply to the order to descend. "Come up and get me." Simons was livid, convinced that Kittinger had succumbed to the breakaway phenomenon, the theorized psychological condition wherein a pilot at altitude would risk his life trying to reach further into space. The thought was laughable to Kittinger, who knew pilots didn't actually suffer from this breakaway phenomenon, and Stapp, too, found Kittinger's reply humorous. Nevertheless, Stapp did follow Simon's lead in ordering Kittinger to begin his descent, to which the pilot tapped out the reply, "Valving gas." The sky outside the porthole windows gradually lightened and returned to an earthly light blue as Man-High 1 brought Kittinger slowly back down through the atmosphere. He carefully valved gas to shrink the balloon and decrease its lift, and dropped batteries to lighten its weight and slow his fall. Opening portholes as he went to let atmospheric oxygen into the capsule, Kittinger landed neatly at 12:57 in the afternoon, with his oxygen supply completely depleted, having traveled just 80 lateral miles from his launch point. Simons was the first to arrive at the Man-High capsule and helped a grinning Kittinger out onto the grass. Considering it was a shakedown flight, Man-High 1 was widely considered a successful mission. But for all the biomedical benefits of these controlled balloon flights, they were limited as well. Balloons could carry a man to a near-space environment, but not all the way into orbit. For that, Kittinger would need to fly in a rocket plane, or more likely on top of a rocket, and by the time he made this historic flight, the wheels were in motion for that latter route to space to take center stage. The time for slowly and methodically learning about space was fast coming to an end. Okay, first, I owe this. Good Lord. So, as our friend FGS has already guessed correctly, this is Breaking the Chains of Gravity by, I'm probably going to get her name wrong, but it's Amy Shira Tidal. So this book is essentially about the things that happened before NASA became a thing. It talks about, it goes over the history of the scientists in Germany who started working on things like the V2 and sort of chronicles their travels from Germany to America and how that ended up turning into NACA, which is an acronym I can't remember right now. Likely not related to the fact that I've been drinking whiskey for an hour and a half. Actually, like 2.5 hours now. But so I have to admit, I actually have kind of a secret obsession with space, and I would love to go to Mars, etc., etc., etc. So I got this book sort of on a whim. I just came across Miss Title's channel on YouTube, and she had some really interesting explanations of things. And when I saw she had a book, I went, well, what the hell? I'll read the book. And it turned out it was actually a fantastic book. So if you have any interest whatsoever in space flight, the history of space flight, how we've gotten to where we are today, I highly recommend this again, Breaking the Chains of Gravity. And yeah, I think that's it for me. So, thanks everybody. That is far too much alcohol for me to have consumed, but somehow we made it through. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you guys next week.